Welcome back to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel. My name is Harry.
And I'm Mary. We're so excited to have you here today for another fascinating episode.
Okay, so you're probably like scrolling through the news today and wondering like, is something shifting in this whole Russia-Ukraine thing?
Yeah, there are definitely a few things happening right now that suggest maybe things are about to change.
Right, like big time. And today we're going to really dig into all of that.
Exactly.
Especially this whole scheduled phone call.
Oh, yeah, between Trump and Putin.
Huge.
Huge.
So we've got a whole bunch of updates from today, March 17th, 2025. And it's everything from what's happening on the ground, the battlefield stuff, to like all the diplomatic back and forth.
It's a lot.
Yeah, so what we're going to do in this deep dive is pull out the really important stuff, the critical information, and like connect the dots, because it's all kind of scattered right now.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
And try to figure out what it tells us about where things stand right now and where this whole conflict might be heading. It's not just about this one phone call, right?
No, it's way bigger than that.
It's the whole picture.
Yes, exactly. This whole thing with Trump and Putin is happening in a really, really complicated environment. So to really get it, we need to look at everything. Ukraine saying they've shot down a bunch of Russian drones. Russia saying they're taking more territory. What's happening with the European Union? That's the EU for you folks. All those European countries working together and their whole debate about sending money and weapons.
Right.
Then there's the whole idea of peacekeepers, accusations of sabotage flying around, and the big one, what Ukraine is saying about how they see this ending and what peace might look like.
All right, so much to cover. Let's break it down. First off, this Trump-Putin phone call.
Yeah.
Big news, right? So the Kremlin, that's Russia's government, basically confirmed it's happening Tuesday. What do we actually know about what they're going to talk about?
Well, Trump himself said the main thing is finding a way to end the war in Ukraine.
Okay.
And he specifically mentioned land and power plants. Now, for you, that's a huge clue. It sounds like he might be open to Ukraine giving up some land and maybe letting Russia keep control of important energy stuff. Yeah, that would be a big change from what the U.S. and most Western countries are saying now, which is they back Ukraine keeping all its territory.
Yeah, that is a big statement. And, it just makes you think about Trump's history, right? Like all that stuff he said in the past and how he's generally been way more friendly towards Russia than most U.S. presidents.
Definitely.
I mean, could this call really be a sign that the U.S. is going to totally switch up how it deals with this whole war?
It's definitely possible, and something you should really watch closely. And remember, Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy, just met with Putin in Moscow.
Oh, yeah.
So they've already been talking a little, like testing the waters before this big phone call happens.
And, it seems like both sides are kind of like cautiously optimistic of these talks.
Right.
Like maybe they can make some progress if they can figure out the details.
I think Putin even said something about working through the nuances.
Right, exactly. So they're both saying, yeah, we can maybe work this out.
Interesting, right.
Very interesting for sure, because it means that even though they clearly don't agree on a lot of things, maybe they both see a way forward.
Maybe it's just maybe.
Okay, well, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about what's actually happening on the ground in Ukraine. They're claiming they've taken out a ton of Russian drones overnight.
Oh, yeah. The Ukrainian Air Force says they shot down 90 out of 174 Russian drones.
Wow.
And they say another 70 were lost because of electronic warfare. That's basically using technology to mess with the signals controlling the drones so they crash or whatever without even shooting them down.
Oh, wow.
If that's true, that's a huge blow to Russia's whole drone operation.
Big time.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, Russia is saying they've captured this village Stepov in the Zaporizhia region. Where's that exactly, and why should we care?
So Stepove is in the Zaporizhia region near the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the one that's been under Russian control for a while now.
Huh?
And it's about 60 kilometers from Zaporizhia city, which is about 37 miles for us. What you need to know is that Russia pretty much controls like 75% of the Zaporizhia region already.
Gotcha.
So taking Stepove might seem small, but it could be part of a bigger plan to really lock down that whole area, especially because it's so close to the nuclear power plant. That gives them a lot of leverage,
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
And of course, we're seeing the usual back and forth about casualties. Ukraine says they've hit Russian forces hard in the last day, like over 1,000 casualties, and destroyed a bunch of equipment.
Right, they're saying 1,210 Russian soldiers killed or wounded, plus they say they took out tanks, artillery, and drones. But remember, this is coming from Ukraine, who's, in the middle of this war, so
Of course.
it hasn't been independently verified. Always take those numbers with a grain of salt.
Always. Yeah, and Russia's also claiming they hit Ukrainian forces and destroyed their vehicles too.
Yep, same story. Hard to know for sure what the real numbers are.
Exactly. You always got to remember that both sides are trying to control the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about reporting facts, it's about morale and trying to make the other side look bad. We also saw a report about a Ukrainian drone attack that hit inside Russia itself. They hit some energy stuff in the Astrakhan region.
Right, that attack caused a fire and someone got hurt. So
Yeah.
even with all the pressure they're facing in Ukraine, they can still hit back inside Russia.
For sure. Okay, so let's jump back to the diplomatic stuff, because there are some really interesting developments about who's supporting Ukraine and who's not. Hungary's being pretty vocal about not wanting to send more EU military aid.
Yeah, their foreign minister basically said Hungary is going to block any attempt to use European taxpayer money to fund the war in Ukraine.
Wow.
Yeah, he's been really clear he's against the war,
Yeah.
wants peace talks, and even accused Brussels, the EU headquarters, of being on the side of war.
That was
So-
the same.
Is this like a crack in the EU's united front? Could this hurt their ability to keep supporting Ukraine? I mean,
Right. This isn't really new for Hungary. They've been criticizing the EU sanctions against Russia this whole time and how much money and weapons they're sending to Ukraine.
right.
But saying they'll block aid is going to cause a lot more tension in the EU, and it might make it harder for them to make decisions together about what to do next.
Okay, so shifting gears, there were these reports coming out of the UK that military leaders from more than 30 countries are meeting to talk about sending peacekeepers to Ukraine.
A lot of people.
Yeah, a whole coalition of the willing is what the UK Prime Minister called it.
I remember that.
That sounds like a pretty big deal, right?
Oh, yeah. Military analysts are saying something like that would need tens of thousands of troops to actually work,
Wow.
especially when you consider how big both armies are. Ukraine has about 1 million soldiers, and Russia has around 650,000. So the big questions for you are which countries would actually send troops, and would Russia even let them in, because they're probably not going to be happy about it.
Definitely something to watch. In other news, the EU Council just approved another big chunk of money for Ukraine. $3.8 billion.
Wow.
Yeah, part of their Ukraine facility,
Yeah.
which brings the total to almost $22 billion that they've sent so far. The Ukrainian Prime Minister was very thankful and said it's crucial for their resilience.
Yeah, it's super important for them to keep running as a country and keep fighting back. It also shows that a lot of the EU is still committed to helping Ukraine, even with disagreements like what's going on with Hungary.
Definitely. Oh, and we saw this kind of weird report from Lithuania. They're saying Russia was behind an arson attack on an IKEA store in Vilnius last May.
What?
Yeah, they're claiming Russian military intelligence did it and that there's a suspect being held in Poland right now.
That's wild. It fits into this whole worry about Russia trying to sabotage things and cause trouble in other European countries. Western intelligence agencies have been warning about that kind of stuff since the war started.
And of course, Russia denies being involved. Yes. Shocker there. Okay, so one more thing. South Korea has offered to take in any North Korean prisoners of war captured in Ukraine if they want to relocate.
Oh, yeah.
This is coming out while there are all these reports that North Korean soldiers are actually helping Russian forces in the war.
Wow, it's pretty complicated, right? President Zelensky even said they might be willing to trade captured North Korean soldiers for Ukrainian prisoners held by Russia.
Oh, yeah.
And now South Korea is offering to take them in. It's a whole other layer to this whole foreign fighter thing and prisoner swaps.
Yeah.
And it kind of confirms for you what intelligence agencies have been saying, that there are North Korean troops helping Russia.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Let's bring in some expert analysis to help us put it all together.
Yeah.
We have some insights from a researcher at the Royal United Services Institute. What stood out to you?
Well, this researcher really hit on something important for you. They said Putin is facing a lot of pressure at home in Russia. There are the nationalist hardliners who want him to keep fighting no matter what. But there are also a lot of regular Russians who would be happy with a peace deal.
I see.
So Putin has to walk a tightrope between those two groups.
Right. The analysis also said that China might be quietly pushing Russia towards a ceasefire,
Yeah,
which could be a huge deal because China and Russia are so close.
totally. China has a lot of sway with Russia, so if they're saying, hey, maybe it's time to chill out, Moscow's going to listen. The analysis also pointed out that this UK thing about security guarantees for Ukraine could clash with whatever Trump and Putin end up talking about.
So,
Well, Russia really doesn't want any European peacekeepers in Ukraine. So you have all these different diplomatic things happening at the same time, but they might not have the same goals, you know?
Oh, so it's not like everyone's on the same page trying to work towards the same solution.
Exactly. The researcher said there are a lot of moving parts, and that's really the best way to describe it.
It's messy for sure.
Totally. We also have some reporting from Kyiv, and they're focusing on a really big question for you. Would Ukrainians even accept a peace deal where they have to give up land to Russia?
And what are they saying?
Well, it sounds like most people there are really against it. I mean, think about it. Like 20% of Ukraine is already occupied by Russia, including Crimea, which they took back in 2014.
Right.
So after all the fighting and all the people they've lost, the idea of just giving up more land for peace is going to be really hard for Ukrainians to swallow.
Makes sense.
The reports say President Zelensky keeps saying that Russia has to completely withdraw all their troops for there to be any chance of real peace. And you know that's a big problem for any negotiations because Ukraine doesn't want to say, okay, Russia, you get to keep the land you took by force.
Right. Okay, so lastly, we have the EU's foreign policy chief. And they're pretty skeptical about whether Russia actually wants peace.
Oh.
Yeah, they pointed to the conditions Russia's been talking about publicly. Things like the status of the Kursk region inside Russia and stopping Ukraine from getting more troops ready. The EU officials saying those aren't real steps towards peace. It's just Russia trying to get what they want through negotiation instead of fighting.
I see.
Which is a really important point for you to consider.
It really shows how much distrust there is between the West and Russia. They're basically saying Russia isn't being sincere about wanting to de-escalate.
Yeah.
They're just trying to win by playing a different game.
Wow. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, we have a lot to consider. We've got this Trump-Putin call that could change everything. We have the war still raging on. We have different countries all trying to figure out how to help Ukraine and maybe even send in peacekeepers. Ukraine is saying they won't give up land, and experts are debating whether Russia is even serious about peace. It feels like we're at a turning point, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. This phone call could have a huge impact on the fighting and all the diplomatic stuff that's going on. What Ukraine decides to do and what the rest of the world does is going to be super important for how this whole thing plays out.
Yeah, one expert even said there are a lot of moving parts, and that's the truth. It's complicated, right? So thinking about all this call to war, the different reactions from other countries and what Ukraine and Russia wanted, what do you think is the most important factor that's going to decide the future of this conflict? So much is on the line here. Land lives, global stability, the whole 9 yards. It's something to really think about as we see what happens next.
It really is.
It really is.
No,